I am happy for you, Ya Ismail Yasin, because you are going to be released tomorrow. However, I am also sad because you will be away from my rigid control.
Yashawishatiya, I am also sad because I will not see your incompatible facial features again in this place. But we can meet again outside because our personal relationship is similar to that of Tom and Jerry. Of course, I am Jerry and I am always smarter than you.
Whatever, I know that you will be under my control very soon. Back to the course of the interrogation, you are required to talk today about the balance sheet approach to calculating the credit loss expense.
Yes, Yashawishatiya. But please, you are required to pay your full attention to me, because this approach is more complicated than the income statement approach, and also because your brain does function on the wrong track. Under balance sheet approach, which is also called the percentage of receivables, the ending balance of allowance for credit losses is a percentage of the ending balance of accounts receivable. Credit loss expense reflects the adjustment of the allowance to its correct ending balance.
I would be grateful if you give me an example.
The example is, Al-Dayasti Samir and Al-Kapitan Aziz company has the following unadjusted account balances at year-end: cash $85,000 debit, accounts receivable $100,000 debit, allowance for credit losses $2,000 credit, and sales on credit $500,000. Based on Al-Dayasti Samir and Al-Kapitan Aziz's experience, 6% of accounts receivable is determined to be uncollectible. Thus, the ending balance of allowance for credit losses is $6,000, being $100,000 the ending balance of accounts receivable multiplied by the 6%. Because the allowance is currently a credit balance of $2,000, only $4,000 is required to be charged to the credit loss expense account, being $6,000 minus $2,000. What journal entry is required to record this calculation, and what carrying amount of accounts receivable appear in the balance sheet in this particular case? The journal entry is to debit the credit loss expense account for $4,000 and to credit the allowance for credit losses account for $4,000. The carrying amount of accounts receivable is $94,000, being the difference between the gross balance of accounts receivable of $100,000 at the year-end and the balance of allowance for credit losses of $6,000 at the year-end.
Does an entity experience a single percentage of uncollectability on all its accounts like the 6% in the previous example, or different percentages may be used for the different likelihoods of collectability?
It is really an excellent question. It is unusual for your mental skills. In fact, an entity rarely experiences a single percentage of uncollectability on all its accounts. For this reason, entities using balance sheet approach to estimate expected credit losses for accounts receivable generally prepare an aging schedule.
Again, I would be grateful if you could give an example of a balance sheet approach with an aging schedule.
This example is, Al-Dayasti Samir and Al-Kapitan Aziz company prepares the following aging schedule on its ending accounts receivable of $100,000. 1. $71,000 in the range of less than 30 days. 2. $18,000 in the range of 31 days to 60 days. 3. $10,000 in the range of 61 days to 90 days. And 4. $1,000 in the range of over 90 days.
Although you are always disappointing me, using my intuition indicates that the company should apply different percentages for each of the mentioned stratum based on experience.
You are absolutely correct. For the first stratum of $71,000, the estimated uncollectible is 2%, and the required allowance for credit losses thereto is $1,420. For the second stratum of $18,000, the estimated uncollectible is 12%, and the required allowance for credit losses thereto is $2,160. The third stratum of $10,000, the estimated uncollectible is 15%, and the required allowance for credit losses thereto is $1,500. The fourth stratum of $1,000, the estimated uncollectible is 20%, and the required allowance for credit losses thereto is $200. Thus, allowance for credit losses ending balance should be $5,280, consisting of $1,420 plus $2,160 plus $1,500 plus $200. Because I focused on what you have previously said, I understood that the beginning credit balance of allowance for credit losses amounted to $2,000 should be considered when determining the amount of credit loss expense for the period. You are correct, and now you are far above the average. Amount to be charged to the credit loss expense account should be only $3,280, being the difference between the $5,280 that should appear as the year-end balance of allowance for credit losses and its beginning balance of $2,000. Also, the carrying amount of accounts receivable appears in the balance sheet as $94,720, being the difference between the gross accounts receivable at year-end of $100,000 and the allowance for credit losses of $5,280 at year-end.
Is there any equation illustrates the reconciliation of beginning and ending balances of the allowance for credit losses?
Absolutely yes. The equation is as follows. 1. Beginning allowance for credit losses, plus 2. Credit loss expense recognized during the period, minus 3. Accounts receivable written off, plus 4. Collection of accounts receivable previously written off. This equation produces the ending allowance for credit losses.
How collection of accounts receivable previously written off is treated?
Occasionally, a customer pays on an account previously written off. In such cases, cash is debited and allowance for credit losses is credited. Note that credit loss expense is not affected when an account receivable is written off or when an account previously written off becomes collectible.
My last question, is there an equation illustrates the reconciliation of the beginning and ending balances of gross accounts receivable? I mean accounts receivable before adjustment for allowance for credit losses.
Yes, the equation is 1. Beginning accounts receivable, plus 2. Credit sales during the period, minus 3. Cash collected on credit sales during the period, minus 4. Accounts receivable written off during the period. The equation produces the ending accounts receivable.
See you soon, ya Ismail Yasin. If not in this life, we will be meeting in heaven after we spent the term we deserve in hell.